the faces of Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, even George W. Bush, it was, oh my God, this man is a revolutionary. He's going to cancel everything that we did.
What does Trump's inauguration mean for America?
Well, it's been heralded as a new order, a golden age, a divergent pathway, sort of reflects the Great Seal of the United States, that great quote from Virgil's Eclogues, Novo Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages. I think that's because of two or three things. Number one, it was the greatest comeback in American presidential history. Number two, unlike 2017, there is no demonstration, so he's won over or defeated most of his opponents. By that I mean the tech lords. That picture of Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Mark Andreessen, Elon Musk sitting next to him. The media is, I mean, they're reduced to saying that just a normal little wave by Elon Musk is a Nazi salute. That's what they came up with on Inauguration Day as far as anger, opposition. So, and the third thing is he signed over 200 executive orders, and he's got just 4 years, and so he thinks he has to move nonstop quickly every minute. So I think we're going to be in for a roller coaster ride in the way we've never seen before.
This is obviously the beginning of Trump's presidency, but yesterday was also the end of Joe Biden's 4 years. And he ended his presidency by pardoning members of his family, by pardoning his allies like Liz Cheney and the people on the January 6th committee. Do you feel that he left his presidency with grace?
Well, he had a sad presidency, and he exited even more sadly. And I don't know what his intentions were, but he gave Trump credence of all the things he'd said. Trump had said, as many of us, that Joe Biden would wait to the very last minutes before pardoning his family. And he waited until Trump was actually giving his address right before he was going to be sworn in. So no, Trump didn't know about it while he was speaking. But he did a lot of things. Then he just took away all the arguments, because these were not pardons, remember, of the traditional sense. We've only done this once in our history, given a preemptive pardon for crimes not noticed or never charged. We only did that with Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon. So that the left had been screaming and yelling in 2007 that Trump had talked about that for the January 6th, but then he didn't. So they were just totally embarrassed, shocked. They were hypocritical. They said, well, maybe it was okay for Biden, but it wasn't for Trump. And then, of course, they greenlighted Trump's own pardons of the J6 people. And it just brought to the fore that he had no defenders, because he had vociferously criticized the way he was deposed. The Obamas, he said, were in on it. Jill Biden blamed Pelosi. He blamed Barack and Schumer, and so there was no constituency left. He left the presidency as a solitary figure. Trump was left under a cloud of anger and invective, but he never lost his mega base. Biden has no base, no defenders, period, not even in his own party.
Trump's inaugural address was a powerful speech, and he began it very optimistically, talking about a new golden age for America. How do you assess his speech compared with previous presidents, obviously the famous ones from John F. Kennedy, FDR, and so on?
Well, those were aspirational speeches. They were, pass the torch to a new generation, ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country, Reagan, all of this, Morning in America, that stuff. But this was it was a blueprint of attack. He went through all of the things, from DEI to energy to the border to crime, and he said, we're going to end illegal immigration. We're going to end this misinterpretation of the 14th Amendment on anchor babies. We're going to end catch and release. It was very detailed, but it was a plan of attack we haven't heard. And you could see the faces of our former presidents. It wasn't just that he bitterly attacked Joe Biden and by association blamed the Clinton-Obama record, but when they heard what he was detailing and promising the faces of Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, even George W. Bush. It was, oh my God, this man is a revolutionary. He's going to cancel everything that we did. And so that was pretty shocking, and everybody thought he would hold back. But he doesn't play by the Marquis of Queensberry rules. His view of the world is these people are pretty nasty people, and under the guise of sober and judicious language, they tried to impeach. They did impeach me twice. They tried to get me off the ballot. They waged lawfare in 5 different jurisdictions against me. They're not nice people, and I'm not going to play by their rules of, and I'm just going to call them out for what they were.
You mentioned Bush, Obama, Clinton, obviously the former presidents. Do you think they all represent one ideological strain, i.e., globalism, and that kind of post-Soviet liberal American era? And obviously, you mentioned Trump he's more nationalistic. He's contrasting with them. Do you think this is kind of the end of, that post-Soviet liberal hegemony?
I think it is. Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, more or less said what you just did. And I think for 2 reasons. The argument that Trump is making and Rubio is making is after World War II, when Russia, China were pretty much non-existent given the tolls of the war, what's now the European Union was flattened. Britain was broke after their heroic sacrifices. We were the only superpower, and the idea was we had to indulge the world so that they could reboot. And it worked with the Marshall Plan and asymmetrical tariffs. But we are no longer that country. We are no longer preeminent, even though we're doing pretty well. So Trump's argument is this was an ossified, calcified paradigm that long outlived its usefulness, and now we are going to look at ourselves vis-a-vis our friends and enemies in terms of America first. And then second, his argument was, and has been throughout the campaign, that globalism was something that was asymmetrical. It enriched the bicoastal professional elite, the tech people, the insurance people, the finance people, the media people, the academic, but it destroyed by outsourcing and offshoring the interior. And he was going to be their retribution and say that we're not going to do quote unquote Bush free trade or Romney free trade or McCain free trade, to speak of his own party. And we're not going to have an open border in the way that the Republicans supported as much as the Democrats.
How different was this Trump from the Trump who gave his inaugural address in 2017?
Well, nobody really knew what he was going to say, so that got a lot. That was, even though he didn't attack people personally, it got a lot more criticism because that was the first formal outline of the MAGA agenda. And that galvanized people to oppose him. But now, when he reiterated many of those points, it wasn't so abstract, and it was detailed. And the subtext was, when he gave that speech, he didn't know anything about Washington. That was his own confession. So when he came in, everybody rushed to him and said, you don't know what you're doing. We're the Republican hierarchy. You need a Rex Tillerson, CEO at State. You need a Jim Mattis at Defense. You need John Kelly at all these people. And their attitude toward Trump was, whatever directive that he issues, I'm going to interpret it as what I think is best. And in some cases, maybe I'll help him and transfer it into bureaucraties. But in many cases, I'm just going to thwart it. So it didn't happen the way he thought it would happen, the MAGA agenda. This time, every single cabinet, all 13 appointments, everybody from the NIH to the FBI, the first requisite is, are you loyal to the president, and does he have to worry about you subverting his agenda like last time? And the answer is no, we're all force multipliers. So when they heard that speech, they kind of got scared because they thought, you know what, this is what Kash Patel and Pete Hegseth and Pound Bondi and Marco Rubio and Jay Bhattacharya. That's what they're going to do, and now they know how to do it, and there's no opposition, interior opposition. There's nothing left, and Joe Biden has discredited the opposition, and even the Obamas, who were very prominent in this weird surrogate presidency where they kind of operated the gears and levers of the Biden administration while he was a waxen effigy. They've been discredited. They put their political capital out on the campaign trail and were refuted. So I don't see any institutional resistance that's going to materialize because Trump is onto them. And I don't see any Democratic, I mean, it's there, but they don't have any strong leaders. There's no leader of the Democratic Party to galvanize them.
Do you think in hindsight it was better that Donald Trump won in 2024 than in 2020? If you look back at 2020, it was a difficult year with the coronavirus pandemic and a struggling economy and so on. And also, some people argue that Trump in 2020 wasn't quite as radical as he is today, or radically conservative. So is it better that actually Joe Biden did win that election 4 years ago?
I'm an adherent to that view, and I've been criticized for saying that because to embrace that view entails that you're not sufficiently sensitive to all the things they did to Trump. And it suggests that maybe they wouldn't have tried to destroy him financially had he been president, or the E. Jean Carroll, all of that, the second impeachment and the assassination. But if you look at it just dispassionately, there's a lot of advantages that he had an interim 4 years. Number one, the Democrats were kind of a one-eyed Jack, and when Biden took over, they flipped it over, and we saw what they're really like. This is not the Harry Truman JFK party. This was a radical neo-socialist Jacobin globalist party. So they destroyed the border in a way we've destroyed the border, the Soros crime wave, the 4 to 6 trillion in printing money, the Afghanistan, the two theater. They saw the whole project right before their eyes, and it repelled them from the trivial, not the trivial, but cultural issues like transgenderism or major officials in the government wearing dresses or stealing women's luggage. All of this was just too much, and that was a result of Trump not being there. And then the second thing that happened, Trump, by his own admission, changed in two ways. He was the target of all of these things we've never seen in American history. We've never seen state attorney generals try to take a major presidential candidate off the ballot like 16 did. We've never seen 5 suits and 91 felony indictments. It was just absurd. And we've never seen a candidate almost killed twice. So I guess what I'm saying is, given all of that, Trump became much more, he became angrier, but he also came sort of reflective and said, you know what, they are doing that. I didn't realize that I represent to them a complete repudiation of who they are and where they were going, and they will do anything to destroy me. It's not so much personal like I thought, tit for tat. It's what I represent. And he really sort of transformed himself into the embodiment of a movement rather than Donald Trump, the Manhattan guy with the orange skin. They were always attacking him, and he was tweeting back. His tweet, I mean, he still is ad hominem a lot, but now he looks at the attacks on him kind of in a cosmic level, less about him personally and more about what he represents, and I think he likes that. And he's starting to say, this is about you, not just me, because of what we are trying to do. So yeah, in a weird way, he became a much more empathetic figure. I think if he had been president those years, he would have never had an opportunity to win over Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, because they went over to him after the Biden administration coerced them, maybe some willingly, that may be the wrong verb, invited them to partner, whether it was Facebook censorship of the laptop or they sat down Mark Andreessen and said, this is what AI is going to be, and here are the winners and here are the loser companies. And they were terrified of what they saw. And I don't think that would have happened. I think they would have still been limousine liberals had that not happened.
You mentioned various figures there: Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. They were both at the inauguration. Trump has also met recently with Bill Gates and other big tech billionaires. And there are some people who say, hold on a minute, these people just a few years ago were heavily involved in the Democratic Party, donated a lot of money to the Democrats, and were perfectly willing to go along with the Biden censorship regime, banning Trump from Facebook and all of these other social media platforms, to give one example. And as you said, to cover up the Hunter Biden story. And suddenly Trump is friends with these people, is allies with these people, is surrounding himself with these people. Isn't the MAGA movement against big tech oligarchies? Isn't conservatism against corporatism? Isn't it right that Trump should treat these people with suspicion at the very least, and perhaps at the most as enemies?
Well, that's what Steve Bannon said. He said when he was asked about that dichotomy and paradox, he tried to square the circle by saying, well, they are suppliants. They went on their Hajj to Mar-a-Lago and supplemented themselves and bent the knee. And that's true. The thing, and in theory, they're contradictory to the MAGA people, except he's not really getting Jamie Dimon and the bankers and the financiers there. He's getting people who make rockets, who make Tesla, who opened up X, who have social media, who Bezos, they have newspapers, they have rockets, they revolutionized and the way we buy things, Amazon. And so I guess what that appeal is to the MAGA people, that these are sort of can-do people, and they can lend their expertise to make the country rich rather than just themselves. There's just two other real quick points. One is these tech lords do not really, I mean, they're political, but they only have one overriding political interest. They don't really care about high taxes or taxes on the middle, because they can pay anything and they have lawyers. So the higher the taxes, the more they evade it or the more money they make. They don't care about censorship unless it intrudes into their own business. But one thing they cannot tolerate is regulation. And when they saw what Biden was doing, forcing them to do certain things to enter the political realm, or telling them that these new technologies of biotechnology and space and AI and cybersecurity and cryptocurrency were going to be controlled. In their way of thinking, I don't mind anything, but I want to be able to make money and to do stuff unregulated. And that's good for the country, and it's better for me. And so that's why they turned on him. And that argument they made to Trump. You don't like me, we don't like you, but you believe in entrepreneurism and you're going to unfree us. And if you do that, the United States will be preeminent in oil production, in space, and AI, and biogenetics, you name it. We will do that for you. And so Trump is it's very similar to the socialist FDR when the war started. He looked around and all of his socialist advisors came to him and said, we need to use New Deal paradigms. This is antithetical to MAGA, but it's the same type of modality. They said, we've got to have New Deal paradigms, and Roosevelt basically said, no, we're back into a recession, 1938, 39. The war's broken out. It didn't really work. We can't say that, so he called it Dr. War, not Dr. New Deal. That's what he said. We're going to do war. So what did he do? He called in that era's version of Bezos, Zuckerberg, and Musk. And that was William Knudsen, the head of GM. He hated Henry Ford, who was a paleocon, and he brought in Harry Kaiser from Oakland. And he said to them, I will give you freedom of regulation, but I want you to go ahead and rebuild the economy. And then he had something called the War Production Board with Charles Wilson, the head of GE. If you look at all of that group of people, they call them the dollar a day guys. They didn't take a salary. In 3 years, Henry Ford was producing a B-24 every hour at Willow Run. Kaiser was producing a Liberty 12,000-ton ship every 3 days in Oakland and Seattle. And William Knudsen had taken the entire, not just General Motors, but the entire automobile industry and turned it into making Jeeps, 2-ton trucks, shipping 400,000 of them to the Soviet Union to mechanize the Red Army. And I think that's what Trump thinks he's doing. He's allowing these people certain opportunities and freedom from regulations on the idea that they're not going to use that against him or against MAGA, but they're going to make the United States rich. And there's been a lot of talk here when you look at, there's been a lot of charts going around in the context of these appointments that when you look at the EU, let's say about 2005 or 4 as terms of GDP, it was not, it was about 90 or 85% of the United States. And you look at it 20 years later with the adjustments made that Britain's not in it, but it's about half. So even under Obama, those 8 years of Obama, the United States grew at a rate that has now nearly doubled the GDP of Europe. And Trump knows that, and these people know that, and they feel that they can do even better. And so that's why people are excited, because it's kind of a mood over here that if somebody says, I want to go to Mars, or I want to create a new car and break into the top 3 like Elon did, there's nobody in Washington say you can't do that. We've got to have environmental. What's your DI? What's your percentage of how many gays do you have working for? There's none of that now. It's go ahead and do it, as long as it makes us more powerful and wealthy and helps people. And so the other thing is that he's very clever. He's not. I mean, he does certain things that they don't understand, Trump. And so all of this stuff about Canada and Greenland and Panama and the Gulf of America, they all wrote it off as just nutty. And then they started thinking about it, and third thoughts and fourth thoughts. So when he says, well, we're going to call it the Gulf of America, they said, this is imperialistic, Yankees trying to dictate. And then they started thinking about it. Well, the coastline of America on the Gulf is 1,700 miles. It's exactly the same as the coastline of Mexico, and the left changes names all the time and tells us that's what's necessary to keep up with the times. So they've had their turn for 400 years, and we are the most powerful. We have more ships in the Gulf. We're just going to change it. And then all of a sudden people say, yeah, and then that brings attention to what Mexico's relationship is with us when they object. And then people who are now saying, well, wait a minute. You're getting $63 billion in remittances, where we subsidize these people with health, education, welfare, housing, so they can send cash back to you people. And you've destroyed our border. You've deliberately sent fentanyl into this country. So out of those things, like same thing with Greenland, it's not so much that the objective, it's the dialogue that follows. So he says, well, Greenland, then, and everybody said he's an imperial, and then they start thinking about it. And they said, you know, in World War II, the United States under Roosevelt pretty much appropriated the Greenland coastland for anti-submarine and air use. And then people start writing and said, well, wait a minute, New York is closer to Greenland than is Copenhagen. Well, wait a minute, Greenland's part of North America, it's not part of Europe. And wait a minute, these sophisticated postmodern Europeans are colonialist. And this is a colony, and Denmark's an imperial, and now they're scrambling to put Greenland's imagery on the royal coat of arms. So that's the type of discussion that all of these things, and that's what he intends, not invading Greenland or sending the 101st down to Panama, but it starts to move the needle on all of these issues.
Well, Britain famously invaded Iceland during the Second World War.
Yes, it did. It just took it.
You mentioned the Mars comment. I thought that was quite interesting. He said that he wants to plant an American flag on Mars. Did this remind you of JFK's famous pledge in his inauguration that we will land on the moon by the end of the decade? And I love that turn of the phrase he said. I don't think it was in the inauguration, but in another speech in Texas, that we will go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Did that sort of invoke JFK for you?
It did, and people forget about JFK. He was quite, I think he was quite rude and kind of derogatory about Eisenhower. He said, we got to get the country moving again. But when he talked about going to the moon, people forget that if you look at those speeches, about the third sentence following that was, we were going to be the first to go to the moon. And the space race, we now make fun of the space race, but liberal commentators were gushing over the space race and the Saturn rocket. And I can remember being in high school and all of a sudden on the news said, news bulletin, Saturn rocket works. Only rocket in the world with a thrust to send men to the moon. Space race over, Russia lost. That was before we went to the moon. So they were just jubilant, the left was. And so I think Trump thinks that in the heart of everybody, there's this latent idea, whatever your nationality, to be preeminent, and the Americans had a better claim and yet had suppressed that. He's got to be careful. I mean, it can get into jingoism, but it's been so repressed. In a way, it's sort of like Germany tiptoeing toward rearming again, or Britain trying to think, well, wait a minute, we used to master the seas, we have why not we do a little bit more? And people, no, we're a postmodern society, a green society, but you get the impression that even some of the opponents would like Britain to resume its place in the world, and that there's only certain ways you can do that. One is with a strong economy, another was a military power, another is a Thatcher-like leader. It's too bad that when Reagan did this, you had Thatcher, who was sort of the elder stateswoman to him and guided him. We have somebody like Milley, but he doesn't have the stature of Britain. If it would be too bad, I mean, we'll see something like that in a lesser faction, I think, when Poilievre takes over in Canada, and I think he will. But if somebody in Britain would come out of the Conservative Party and be bold like Thatcher was, it would be a wonderful partnership.
I also want to ask, I mean, by the way, we've got Keir Starmer in Britain, so people can make their own judgment as to whether he compares with Thatcher and Reagan.
I think she's pretty good.
I want to ask about the Manifest Destiny, because I thought that was a really interesting part of Trump's speech yesterday as well. That must have invoked Teddy Roosevelt and some of those other 19th century presidents.
James Polk.
But also, I think it's interesting. There's some people who argue that if an empire isn't expanding, it's declining. So do you think that Trump basically signs up to that ideology that says America must expand, we must, increase our territory and so on, otherwise we are declining?
That's a very famous line, and I think it's Book 1, Section 140 of Thucydides, where the Athenians are trying to defend their empire, and they say, people like us can't put arbitrary limits on our natural expansions. It didn't end up well for them, but there's that argument, except we're pretty much in a static world today where there's not vast areas like the North American continent that's unexplored or unsettled. So it becomes now a zero-sum game. In other words, when you want to take something, you're taking it away from an established entity, and that's going to be much harder. But I don't think when Trump's talking about these things, he's talking about the way that the opposition interprets it. So he's not going to go down to Panama. He's not going to go invade Greenland. What he's saying to Denmark is, I think, or to Greenland, we don't really care who officially runs Denmark. If you want to say that you run Denmark as a colony, but we're on the same team, and China and Russia are eyeing your country, and you can't do anything about it. And so we are going to come in here and protect it, not just for us. We like the prestige and the power, but if we don't do this, the whole West loses, because you'll have Chinese and Russian people controlling the Northwest Passage, and that might be someday as important to us as the Panama Canal. It's that type of attitude. And he's telling Panama, nobody would have signed this treaty if two Chinese-related companies were at the mouth of both ends of this canal. And we don't mind Singapore, we don't mind. Taiwan, we don't. We have American companies, but you have two countries, and they're there for one reason: to set up shop in times of crisis, to delay or hinder the transference of warships. And you know it, and we know it. And it's that type of pressure that I think he thinks will be effective, so that China will either make a deal with him, pull out one of those companies, or do something like that. But I don't see him physically acquiring these territories by force, because that is one of the iconic canons of the MAGA movement, that you don't engage in optional military engagements on the ground anywhere in the world unless they're just entirely feasible and you can win them in a way that plays to our own military strength, and in a cost-benefit analysis it works out well for us. But he's railed so much about Syria and Libya and Afghanistan and Iraq as disasters. I don't think he wants to get into a shooting war in Panama. He doesn't want to, offend the people of Greenland and all that stuff. But he's trying to say to the world, the Panama Canal is essential for the United States' interest to help and protect the West, and so is Greenland. And Canada cannot be allowing an open border on our northern border and acting like Mexico. Canada is more like us, and yet it's acting in the same way as far as trade policy and defense and an open border as Mexico is, and that's not right. We've been through too much together. So I think he more or less dethroned the Trudeau government. I think people forget that well, there's been a lot of things in the world that have happened. We don't know how they'll ultimately finish, but from Trudeau to the fall of the Assad dynasty to the willingness of Hamas to negotiate, it was all predicated on the braggadocio of Donald Trump. And at some point, he's going to have to pull the trigger, because people are going to call his bluff. Because he said, if you don't release those hostages, this is going to happen. I can solve the Ukraine. When you say that, people are going to say, well, he probably can, but who's going to be the first guy to test him? And when that happens, last time he was able to do it by killing Soleimani when everybody told him he couldn't, to kill Baghdadi, to put maximum pressure on Iran and get rid of ISIS. And then after that, everybody was pretty hesitant to challenge him. But he's going to have to do that again, because it's been a while and Biden has ruined U.S. deterrence.
I want to get back to my question about the people surrounding Trump, because I think one of Trump's flaws, and you're brilliant at articulating what his strengths, and I think, as you say, on foreign policy, he's fantastic at making these deals. But one of his flaws is that he does take flattery, very seriously. He likes people who like him, and you get people like Lindsey Graham and, to an extent, let's say Bill Gates or Zuckerberg, complimenting him a lot, and he likes that. And that could lead to potentially some issues, some friction with the MAGA movement, with the goals of, let's say, breaking up tech oligarchies, which is one of those things that people like Steve Bannon has been talking about for a long time. And it looks like Trump isn't going to do that. He's going to go the other way, because suddenly these people are complimenting him. So can you just perhaps talk about that one character flaw? Maybe you disagree with me. And are you concerned that that could lead to some issues in his second term?
Well, as I said earlier, Steve Bannon now has modified his criticism and said that they have been supplements and have been used by Trump, played by Trump. And I think that all of them feel, I don't quite see it as symmetrical. I think that Bezos and Zuckerberg and even Gates, I don't know about Elon, but they feel that when they see him, they're sitting next to a cobra. They have no idea what will happen if they cross him, because they feel that he can be as hard on them as he is nice now. So I think it's going to be a quid pro quo, but I think he's going to have the majority of the cards. The other thing is, in actual power, his power right now, his mandate is emotional and psychological and spiritual. All of his issues that he ran on polls 65%, 60%. He's got the Supreme Court. But when you actually look at the implementation of the laws, they're all the courts are going to go after his executive order. At some point, he's got to get this legislative agenda through, and he only has until these special elections when they replace cabinet members. He's only going to have 2 House people. And the way our system works, of these 218 or so House members, any one of them who wants to stop the entire Trump agenda will be all over the papers. And in his own district, he will be pilloried, except if he exacts as the price of his vote all sorts of concessions for money and for his district, then he'll be standing up for the people who elected him. And the same thing, he only has 3 in the Senate, when with J.D. Vance's fourth, maybe 4. And he understands what happened last time when he offended Mitch McConnell and John McCain. Mitch McConnell actively tried to subvert him. John McCain was dying of a glioblastoma and was brought in literally on a stretcher to cast the sole vote that destroyed the effort to repeal Obamacare after John McCain had sworn he would never do that and had run for Senate successfully against Obamacare. But his point was, I hate Donald Trump more than I dislike Obamacare. So a lot of these transactional relationships are based on the idea from last time that, and he says this. He says this again and again. He says, we had a great, but we could have done more. I look at that, and we could have done more. We got stopped here. We didn't get rid of Obamacare. We spent too much money. I listened to Fauci. I didn't have my people up there in the White House. Birx and Fauci. So I think now he's very careful. And another thing he didn't realize is that he brought in all of those generals, and he brought McMaster and Mattis and Kelly, and he thought they were all Patton and MacArthur. He said, these are my MacArthurs. But today's general is a very different person, especially a Washington-centric general. And all of these groups that are galvanized and tried to destroy him, the administrative state, the never-Trumpers, the left wing of the Democratic Party, the media, academia, the high echelon of the military, the international people, he understands that just yelling at them and screaming at them or trusting them is suicidal. So what he tries to do is have some transactional relationship with them. And I don't know to what degree that will deteriorate and he won't be able to control it. But right now, given the margins, it would be insane to insult Lindsey Graham or go after a couple of House members. He would not. It wouldn't work. Got to remember, the Republicans as individualists are not like the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party under Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi, they don't have one defection. So that's a force multiplying effect. For the Democrats traditionally to win in the House, they only need 1 vote margin. The Republicans need 10 or 15 because they always defect. And Trump understands that. And he knows that a lot of these guys, you can't call up some of these Freedom Caucus people and say, look, if you bolt and let the Democrats stop me, I'm going to primary you. And they'll say to him, go ahead. You don't know what my Arizona district is like. You don't know what Northern California is like. You don't know what the interior of Utah is like. So he's got to be careful on that. I
So
give
he's
him a
beginning
pass
to
on
learn
that.
politics, maybe a bit of LBJ in Trump. I want to ask about Fauci. You mentioned Fauci there. Biden issued a load of preemptive pardons, like I said earlier in the interview, to a lot of people. He covered all the bases, it seems, of the people that the Trump DOJ may have investigated or prosecuted. I know you're not a legal expert, but I'm interested in what can the Trump people do now that they have these preemptive pardons? What do you think they should do? Should they go after other people who didn't receive pardons? Because surely there has to be some kind of justice, some kind of retribution to all of the investigations that the Biden administration, did against Trump and his allies and so on. So what can Trump do? Should they try and expose what the
Yeah,
Biden
I think that
administration
the
did? Should
House
they
will
go
do
after them or
that.
what?
But there are two peculiarities of our legal system that concern pardons. And by the way, you can't refuse a pardon. If you say, I don't want a pardon, you can grandstand, but it's still in effect. The person who is pardoned preemptively for everything that happens cannot invoke the Fifth Amendment. So they can't say, I cannot testify because it'll incriminate myself. So they can bring Fauci in. Let's say Peter Daszak, for example, who, basically was the godfather of the Wuhan stream of money from the United States. You can bring in Fauci and you can say, did you do this, this, this? But as I understand it, these pardons, they cover everything that may be uncovered that they did at the time of the pardon in the future. But they do not give a person, you can't go out and murder someone. So you can bring Fauci in and you can have him testify about Peter Daszak or Francis Collins. And if he perjures himself and conflicts with prior testimony, then he's subject to prosecution. And he can't say, I don't remember, I'm not going to testify. Say, I don't remember, but he can't say, I'm not going to testify. So I assume that they're going to go after some of the people around Fauci. And from you look at the emails, someone like Peter Daszak or who Echo Health or especially Francis Collins is just as culpable. I don't know about Burke. She was a little bit more clever. And when you look at Milley, he basically did one unethical thing, and that was he attacked the President of the United States for an innocent photo op, and he grandstanded. But he did two things that were obviously illegal. And one of them was calling up his Chinese counterpart without the permission of the president and basically tipping him off that he would have a conduit of conversation anytime Trump issued him an order. That is treasonous. And the second thing he did is, under the statute, the chairman of the Joint Chief has no chain of command authority. So he's an advisor. He cannot enter the chain of command. That's against the code of military justice. He cannot say to a theater commander, as Milley did, you report directly to me in times of crisis. No. The theater commanders, CENTCOM, AFRICOM, they report directly to the Secretary of Defense. So my point is that of all the people, I think Milley had the most exposure of all of them that got pardoned. And they will call Milley in, and they will probably, in a House investigation, put him under oath and ask him, did Lloyd Austin give you that order to talk to the Chinese, and see what he says? Because Lloyd Austin, if he did give him that order, is culpable. And did Lloyd Austin give you permission to bypass him and deal directly with theater commanders, and see what he says? It's that type of thing that I think that they're going to do, and I think it'll be more, I don't know, for media consumption than actual putting people in jail. It'll be very hard to do that. The other thing they're talking about is reforming the whole Department of Justice system, and that they're trying to figure out how to stop lawfare, and lawfare is predicated on the idea that you indict somebody in either New York or Washington, and with the certainty that the 90% anti-Trump or anti-Republican jury in both places will convict them, and you run up and they're very expensive places to conduct law, and you will bankrupt them. So nobody wants to be indicted, and the Democrats hold that over everybody's head. And then these juries that, Letitia James jury, Alvin Bragg, E. Jean Carroll, they're all the same. And so they're trying to write legislation that says if you are arrested or you do something in Washington, you have a right for a change of venue if you're a politician back to your own district or something like that, because they're conducting they're using the judicial branch to bankrupt people and disgrace them before they ever go to trial, on the basis that the jury will convict them of anything. And that's got to change.
I want to pick up on something else you mentioned earlier, that Trump is incredibly popular, more popular than he's ever been before. And the policies that he's pursuing are also popular, particularly when it comes to energy policy, the economy, immigration, and so on. The Democrats, some have argued, have lost the moral high ground. Now, they were always very proud of themselves because they were progressive on issues like gay marriage, and a majority of Americans support gay marriage. On abortion as well, again, more Americans support abortion than are against it. And the Democrats always felt, I think, particularly under Obama, that they had this moral high ground. They had the American people on their side. They were on the so-called right side of history, particularly on social issues. Do you feel they've lost that moral high ground? I know that you, as a conservative, disagree with them on all of those issues in any case. But in terms of the American public and the American public's view towards the Democrats, towards their policies, do you think there's been a real shift rightwards and they've lost that moral high ground?
Yeah, for that to be true, you would have to look at their constituencies to see whether they've had defections, and in fact they have. So here in California, there were 5 large counties that, and I live in one of them that's blue, that have flipped to red in the last election. And they flipped because of about 3 issues, but mostly it was the hyperinflation, gas prices, California regulations that they connect with Washington. But when you look at the Rio Grande Valley communities, Latinos, some of them just flipped 100% to Trump. So these issues that you're talking about, especially an open border, it hurts, and it hurts inner city blacks, and it hurts Hispanics who don't have the resources in their communities to have all of their institutions flooded, their schools, their health facilities, and then no background checks on Sureños, Norteños, M13 gangs. So that constituency. And then you see the feminist constituency. You're getting defections over girls' sports. There's a lot of very liberal women that endorsed Trump because he protected, they felt, women's sports. And you can go down the line on all of them, and you can see it in California now. We had this record Dresden-like fire, 25,000 acres, 250,000 people displaced, the vast majority of them Biden and Harris voters. And they're looking at what happened. It's just a confederacy of dunces. The mayor's a neo-social Castroite, is in Ghana. The deputy mayor that she appointed, DEI appointee, he's under house arrest for phoning in bomb threats. The head of Power and Water, she's a DEI appointment who got $750,000 double, and she replaced somebody, two people before her. The person was indicted for bribery, and she didn't know the reservoir was not full, the hydrants were not full. Then you had the gay, lesbian fire chief who's talking about DI hiring, and when there was nobody there, then there's 100 fire trucks that were not in service because of diesel clean air mandates they didn't meet that new qualification in California. Then you had the assistant fire chief that said if she can't pick up a male, it's because the male's in the wrong place in a fire. So that was a perfect storm. And that shocked everybody in California. And California was moving a little bit, on the voting to reinstate penalties for shoplifting or to reinforce prohibitions against DEI hiring. But you can see that these are constituencies. I guess the best way to term it is, if you look at that left-wing woke DEI socialist agenda, eventually it's going to destroy everybody. But the people who promulgated it, created it, advanced it, always thought that either because of their race or their zip code or their money or their influence, they were protected species, and it would never boomerang on them. So Latinos never thought that an open border would destroy their communities. Blacks never thought that in the Rainbow Coalition, Latino gang members from Central America would destroy their inner city. Wealthy people never thought that DEI hires and green fanaticism would destroy their community. So it's kind of an organic process that it caught up to all of them. And that was one of the reasons Donald Trump won. There was at least a quarter of the voters that voted not for Trump, but against Biden and what he stood for, and Harris and what she stood for.
Well, the Democrats thought they had this supermajority, and that basically Republicans could never win elections again because of Barack Obama, and obviously that's been proved to be utterly false. And the credit has to go to Donald Trump, not to the Mitt Romneys of this world.
No,
I want
Mitt
to ask about the
Romney.
media. You mentioned about Elon Musk's supposed Roman salute at yesterday's rally. How do you think the media have changed since 2017? How do you think they're going to cover the Trump presidency? CNN, for example, I believe, or I've read reports that they've been told to be more fair on Trump and to give more of the opposing views. The same with the New York Times, and perhaps the Washington Post with Jeff Bezos is also, at least from top down, from the editors, telling the journalists you need to be a bit more conservative, or at least have conservative voices.
Well, there's two things that have changed, three things that have changed. And one is the election, that he won the popular vote. So now they understand that the majority of Americans are not where they are. And before they always said it was just an electoral college scheme. They can't say that anymore. The second thing is they are hemorrhaging audience. So CNN now is down to 300,000 or 400,000 people, where Fox has 4 or 5 million. And so they're hemorrhaging. All of the print, the LA Times has just about had it. Washington Post has just about had it. So they know that constant harangue, Trump, 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 evil, 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 convicted felon, rape, that doesn't work. And the third thing is the courts now, who, for all their bragging about judicial integrity and independence, they do reflect public opinion. So all of a sudden, a military veteran who was defamed by CNN, Jake Tapper, he wins a big court source. And then all of a sudden, George Stephanopoulos, who was always felt he was exempt, he says rapist, 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 rapist. And Trump sues him and says, actually, I was convicted of sexual harassment, not rape, and that's libelous. So then ABC says, oh my God, public opinion's away from, and they settle for 16 million. And then just the other day, when you say that AOC said that she wouldn't go to the inauguration of a rapist, right after that word has ended in a lot of financial loss, that is stupid to do that in this environment. And I think there'll be repercussions. But more importantly, if you say that he gave a Nazi salute, and you're saying this about a person who has 400 billion in assets, and you produce almost instantaneously on the internet Kamala Harris doing this, Elizabeth Warren, almost every politician at some point, and then you add the fact that he's touching his heart that lead into it, that kind of exempts it anymore, then under the current circumstances, it's pretty clear that that's going to be actionable. And so I just think that we're not going to see as much of that anymore, because people are going to sue them, and they're winning. They're winning, and they're going to win big. And I think there'll be repercussions on this salute that CNN, I think he'll sue them.
One of the other most extraordinary things I noticed at the inauguration yesterday was that you had people like Theo Von and Jake Paul and these kind of podcast bro type people literally at the ceremony. And Trump, not only did he win over minority voters that you've talked about, Latino voters and so on, but he also won Gen Z, or Gen Z as Americans call them, young voters, particularly young men. He went on Joe Rogan, and that just went incredibly viral. And, there's a huge upsurge of support among young men for Trump and for the Republicans. Does this remind you of any other president? I don't know, did Reagan have this same kind of influence on young people at the time? Is this different to that? Is this a new phenomenon? What's going on with Trump and his young support?
Well, three presidents had that ability, at least initially. Reagan did, and his argument was that I'm going to make changes so you can afford a house and your generation can have a better America. JFK's appeal was, I'm young like you, and we're going to take over from 75-year-old Eisenhower in the 50s stasis. Obama had that with the left, that I'm cool and hip. Bill Clinton tried with the sunglasses. So they all try it, and some of them are more effective. But what's different about Trump is that, like Reagan, he's old, but he has no prerequisites. He has no hierarchies. He has no protocol. So when he was in New York, I used to read stories about why people hated him because he hung around with Mike Tyson. He hung around with Al Sharpton. He hung around with boxing promoters, Al King, who was completely disreputable. And when he surrounds himself by Steve Bannon, the way Steve Bannon dresses or looks, or he has no problems with having Fetterman come with his shorts. In other words, it gets him in trouble sometimes, but his attitude is he judges people on what their usefulness is and their ability is. And I think he got that from being a builder. And he got a lot of empathy for people who are not and he's an outsider too. I mean, with the mugshot, you talk to people in Manhattan and you ask them, before Trump was president, was he on the A, B, or C list? And they'll tell you the D list. They didn't want to go to dinner with him because he had declared bankruptcies, or he'd been married 3 times, or the way he looked was. And that plays to his advantage, that he does not judge people by the way that traditional Republicans do. If you come and talk to Trump, he's impressed by Harvard, Yale, and all that, but he's not exclusionary. So he will bring people around him of any background if he finds out they have talent, and that makes him accessible. So when you saw him go into Madison Square Garden after, I have never seen right before the election a menagerie like that. I mean, he had on the one hand a button-down tie Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House. Then he had apostate RFK and Tulsi Gabbard. Then he had Hulk Hogan. Then he had Kid Rock. Then he had Joe Rogan. Then he had Dana White. Mixed martial arts. They were all there, and they were all getting along with each other, and they all had one thing in common. Nobody cares what we dress like. Nobody cares what we say. Nobody cares where we went to school, but we're all successful, and we have things in common. We all like the country, and Trump knows that. And it's I don't think that people ever saw that side of him. I'll give you an anecdote. When I was writing the first book, I talked to a lot of people, and I talked to a very important financier in New York, and he said he could see sometimes out his window one of Trump's buildings, and no one knew that Trump was being watched. He didn't know, but he would get out of his car and go shake hands with the cement person, the electricians. There was no advantage other than as a businessman you want to, but he felt comfortable with him. Another person I asked him about who played golf with him, and he said, yes, he bets on all the time, and sometimes he quote unquote forgets his wallet when the bet is due. But he said, before I got angry, it wasn't very long at all after I had played with him and we were betting on holes and he wouldn't pay up, he would walk over to another group of caddies, Cuban Americans, and he'd come back and he wouldn't say anything. And then he got curious, and so after Trump left, he went over there, and he said he went over and gave us cash to send for our funeral, for a family member to be buried. And he said the same thing. Another person said, we went into Mar-a-Lago to eat, and all of a sudden he disappeared in the kitchen. So we didn't know what was going on. And then we found out he went into the kitchen and said, we closed the restaurant, so I have my friends over, and here's $200 for each of you, and lost tips in cash. So he has an empathy with working people. And that's why he couldn't fake that when he was those 2 iconic moments at McDonald's when that Indian American guy said, I'm just ordinary. And he just out of the blue said, you are not ordinary. And then his wife said, you took a bullet. And Trump just, I think I did. And it was, I guess I did take a bullet for you. And the same thing with the garbage truck. Nobody else could do that. Romney couldn't do it. Obama couldn't do it. It had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with attitude and ease with working people. And so that's what when I go to Stanford and I talk to people that despise him, which is most people, That is one of their greatest criticisms of it, that they feel that he has diminished the office because he has no he has no regulations, he has no requisites, he has no restrictions on who gets to see him and the people he associates with. And so, and what Trump is saying is, well, I'm sure that all the people who sold out the country with Biden from China and Ukraine and all of his cronies had ties and suits and talked like they were normal. And I'm sure that Jack Smith and all the people who went out after me were all Harvard trained, or I'm sure that Anthony Blinken with his Harvard degrees or Yale degrees who called up and cooked up the 51 intelligence. But I don't do that. I don't care. And that really resonates. So there's a natural ease, and he doesn't judge people by their resumes or their titles or their degrees, and that comes across to his advantage.
He's also very funny. And you
He's very
mentioned the
funny.
assassination attempt. Yeah, no, I think he's hilarious. You mentioned the assassination attempt. He talked about that yesterday in the inauguration address, saying that, God had basically placed him on earth and he was able to survive that as a kind of act of providence. Maybe you can talk a bit about how that has changed Trump as a man. Do you think, is that genuine? He doesn't seem like a particularly religious person, but maybe it's genuine. But I do want to ask, this whole interview, you've been incredibly positive about Trump, and I think, again, as I said earlier, I think largely you're correct, but is there anything you're worried about in this second term? Because people have got short memories. That first term was chaotic. There were lots of problems. I know you said he's learned from his mistakes. Is there anything that concerns you? Is there anything that kind of worries you over the next 4 years?
I'm a little worried about intrinsic paradoxes in the MAGA agenda, and I'll just name two very quickly, or three. So he had this populist tax cutting, and that meant no taxes on military people, no taxes on first responders, no taxes on Social Security, no taxes on tips. You total that up, and it could total, in theory, $1 trillion. And then he says that he wants to build up the military and then extend tax cuts and maybe accentuate them. So that is predicated. That's never. So in the history of the American presidency, no president has ever been able to cut taxes and then grow the economy enough because of deregulation to get enough revenue without drastic spending. No one. Reagan failed. He had big deficits because he could not cut. So yes, all those tax promises will work, but only if Elon can cut $2 trillion. And I'm not sure he can, because the discretionary spending is only a third of the budget. And when you get on, Arnold Schwarzenegger here in California bragged that he could cut, and when the SEIU and the government employees unions went after him, they destroyed him. I mean, every night there were pictures of him with his cigar and his private jet, doesn't care about you. The other thing is, and we talked about very in passing, is Jacksonianism is that his foreign policy, no better friend, no worse enemy, no optional military engagements, it's all based on the creation of deterrence. And that means that from time to time he's going to have to use force, and he's going to have to be careful that he doesn't get involved and bogged down somewhere. He's going to pick and choose where he uses force to restore deterrence, and he has to explain to his MAGA base, this is not Iraq, this is not in Afghanistan, this is not nation building. So he's got to be very careful about that. That's another problem that he has. And then and we've talked about the most obvious, that as a business person, he uses the H-1 visa, but he's got people around him that, unless he can convince them, that have abused that system. Under that statute, it says if you have a bachelor's degree and if you have a skill that there's not enough Americans who possess it, then you can allow people to come in pretty much freely and get almost an entirely renewable each year green card. And what's happened in Silicon Valley is when you have people graduating from Cal State Fresno or Cal State Bakersfield with coding degrees, and they go to Silicon Valley, they're bringing people in from Taiwan, Korea, but especially India, with BAs, and they're not paying them the 150,000 a year, they're paying them 70,000. And and so they are abusing that system. What it was envisioned is, we are short engineers at the PhD design level, and yet those countries do not like those PhDs to leave. They want their other people to come. And so he's going to have to tell the tech people, bringing in a lot of people with BAs and paying them almost nothing and having them almost as indentured is at our expense. So if you're going to keep that type of visa, then you're going to have to reflect its original intent, and you're going to cut it down to only people who are really rare, and we don't have enough of them. And that's true. But so the immigration thing is bad. The final thing, and I'll stop, is the reason that the deportations might work in a way that it caused massive resistance in the past is, this time the 12 million people who came were not from Mexico. Usually Mexico was 90%. Now it's about 50%. And so there's not, for 50% of the people from Ukraine or Russia or China or Korea, whatever they are, they don't have a constituency here of expatriates who say, this is racist. So he's going to be able to deport a lot of Venezuelans and Colombians and Guatemalans and Chinese nationals and Middle Easterners and Syrian, when nobody's going to care, because they don't have a community here that's going to say this is Islamophobic, all that. But if he continues that, so he's going to get rid of the people, the 700,000 that are felons, and then he goes down to the next 1.5 million that have already gone through the system. They were already adjudicated, they should not be here. They were ordered to be deported, and they never showed up. And that 1.5 million, there would be no problem. And then he's going to go into the next iteration, and those are people who are able-bodied, young, on public assistance and not working. No one's going to complain about that. But when he gets down to the 4th or 5th iteration, say 3 or 4 million after he's deported, he's going to get people from Mexico, a lot of them, and they're going to be some elderly, some young, but they're here because they have some kind of familial relationship. And speaking as someone in a community where it's 95% Mexican American or Mexican national or illegal alien, that's going to be a problem, because a lot of those people are not just on welfare, they're working. And so what is he going to do with the people who came here illegally, who deal in cash that hurts the economy, but they're laying cement or they're driving a tractor or they're working in a meat packing plant and they're not on welfare? Because that's his future constituent. I don't know what he's going to do about that, but that's going to come very quickly. The first year of deportations will be no objection, but if he goes down, as he's going to have to, because there's 12 million of them, and then we'll see what happens.
As an historian,
Yes.
what are you most looking forward to out of the Trump presidency? Because I know that he says he's going to declassify all sorts of historical files. Maybe that will be interesting to you. Is there anything from an historical perspective that you're excited about?
No country has ever really been preeminent that's insolvent. And my colleague Neil Ferguson always points out that when your interest payments are larger than your defense budget, that no society continues after that threshold. So I think all of us feel, there was a period, believe it or not, when Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton balanced the budget for 4 years in a row, and we were on track. And then Obama had the Simpson Bowles. They sat down and they said, this could do it. He fired them all. Had we took that paradigm, right now we would only owe about 40% GDP. We're up to 123. So if Trump could actually cut $2 trillion and open the economy up and get an extra trillion in revenue and get close to balancing the budget, or get on a trajectory where people could see, that would be an enormous achievement. And the United States would be in the position that it was after the war. So I think all of us feel that we're over-consuming, we're borrowing, and we're going to destroy that. That is a classical historian. When I look at what happened to the Athenian city-state, or happened to 4th century Rome or 15th century Byzantium. I usually look at the fiscal condition, and usually it's a matter of we had to inflate the currency, or we had to renounce public debt, or we had to appropriate private capital to pay our bills. And when you start doing that, you have no society.
You could mention the French Revolution as well,
The French
sort of lead up to
Revolution.
that.
Yeah.
And I think Calvin Coolidge would be very happy with a balanced budget. Thank you very much, Victor,
Okay.
for joining us.
Okay. Take care, Stephen.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the GBN America YouTube channel.